I've told y'all all my ringtones are Beatles songs.
There you
know. So, yeah, and I
didn't know that.
See, I think that works well. Yeah, my default.
Hey Jude.
Well, there is a Hey Jude. You know, I've got a friend that's Hey Jude because I try to match, you know, for particular people the personality with the song. When I was a boy, growing up in Hampton Roads, my father, we would go out in the summer and pick strawberries, and so.
Strawberry Hill.
Strawberry Fields.
Yes, that's good. Yeah, that's right. My daughter, when I was putting my daughters in, I wanted it to be She's Leaving Home. but
Not yet.
Well, she said that's too sad. Dan, every time I call, I don't want you to be sad. So she chose Here Comes the Sun.
That's a good one.
That's appropriate. My wife's ringtone is, of course, when I'm 64.
When I'm 64.
Yeah, number 9. That would be good.
I know.
That just go on forever.
Yeah. If you like the
but
Beatles, come to the event
like
center.
Yeah. Now there's
that Beatlemania is fantastic. They do a good job.
I've got an Eleanor Rigby, but I don't want to share it with anybody because that's really depressing. Eleanor Rigby,
Yeah, that was a little down.
That's not good. And my default ringtone is the song that I really like. And just take. Oh, they're all great. By and large.
Yeah,
but just take a guess at what would. And you got to be careful because there's a lot of romantic. And if I give it to a woman and my wife finds out, Norwegian wood, I could be in very big trouble. So I say, I want to hold your hand, Michelle, that kind of stuff.
And her name's
Could be
not
in big trouble.
Sergeant Pepper's.
No, my default ringtone is Maxwell Silverhammer.
Oh, geez.
Maxwell Silverhammer.
Oh, I like that one too.
Yeah. So anyway, it's if you do ringtones, and every now and then I'm thinking whether I should change it. Because there are other groups that I like and could do the same. I could do the same thing.
Oh, yeah.
With it. Like I like Queen, and I could
Oh,
do
yeah.
Queen, songs. Or
Yep.
I like Green Day.
Oh, yeah.
And I could do Green Day songs. But
American
Beatles are just really good.
If you have any socialist friends, they'd be back in the USSR.
Yeah. And sometimes you got to gear it. I had a guy who was an accountant, and Taxman was the one, and somebody else, a woman I'd helped, Blackbird, and Rocky Raccoon was a good friend of mine, So it was sometimes I spend hours matching ringtones, which shows I have what?
Too much.
Way too much time.
Way
All right,
too
so we don't have way too much time. So let's talk. Joey is nodding. I'm sorry. I can't. I'm thinking about that. I'm still thinking about that belly dance. And it's just very distracting.
It was really good.
Yeah, I don't want to get into it.
I was there when they did it.
I have learned more than I wanted to know.
Oh, it was,
way more than I wanted to know.
it was very
Okay.
interesting, believe me.
We're looking at the American century, which is the 20th century, and we're focusing on foreign policy. In our first meeting last week, we talked about the first session as we begin to look at ourselves, or looking out beyond ourselves. Because before, let's say the 1880s, 1890, we were pretty much focused on us. Yeah, because what's happened with us? Yeah, we're built. That's exactly that. Put as well as I could possibly put, better. We're building a country, and in that we have all kinds. We have issues like Civil War and industrialization and establishing democracy and expansion and all of that. So we become kind of inwardly focused. But things change when we get into the 1890s, and what are some of the things that are occurring that after 1890 that kind of move us to say, geez, we probably need to look beyond our shores.
And the Indian Wars.
Okay, the Indian Wars are pretty much over. And you know, the irony with the Indian Wars is that philosophy, well, a lot of it's a tragedy, a very sad thing. But, you know, part of the American philosophy is a small standing army. And so, you know, we responded with a small standing army. And so we've got the Indian Wars are settled, the sectional difference is settled between North and South. That's settled. Industrialization is humming. And what would industrialization, why would industrialization kind of push us to look outside of us, begin to look outside of ourselves?
You kind of custom.
You gotta have customers. You gotta have markets. And so you gotta have markets, and you need sources of supply, right? You gotta have raw materials. Now we're blessed with a lot of raw materials here, but we're not blessed with everything. And so, you know, it's nice to have markets, nice to have trade. And we're now at a time when we get to the late 19th century where the whole world is changing. And what's happening in the entire world, you know, in the late 19th century? Everybody is scrambling for territories, right? Because Europe is going through the same industrialization. You know, Britain is, certainly the United Kingdom. You know, Germany is you know, kind of exploding because they weren't a country before 1871, so now they're unified, which means raw materials are close. Their industrialization is kicking in. Italy wasn't a united nation until 1870. They want to be part of the big dance. Everybody is scrambling for territory, right? And the United States wants to see itself as a major player, so
We're looking for territory.
we're looking for territory. And we talked about this. Where do we look first? Now, even though in the United States, before we do that, even in the United States, so there's a little conflict, right? What's the tension within the political system in the United States?
Stay home.
Okay, if you've got a segment of the population that says we shouldn't do this. We shouldn't be like the Europeans and Japan. We should stay home. We should stay home. Why do they say that? Why are they saying we should focus, we shouldn't, it's almost less, we should stay, and more, we shouldn't be involved out there? Why are they saying we shouldn't do what the Europeans are doing?
You don't want to be a colony. You don't want to be an empire or a colony.
Yeah, I mean, look at our history. We did what? We were a colony and said,
Goodbye.
yeah, goodbye. Being a colony is not a good thing.
No.
You know, we fought against imperialists. And for us to say, well, now we're an imperialist too, you know, that seems to go against what America stands for, right? You know, you can talk all you want about, oh, we're making America great in the late 19th century, but if you violate what America is, what are you making great? You know, what are you making great? So the idea, there are people, anti-imperialists, and as you look at the anti-imperialists, even though, you know, it's kind of an interesting cross-section, most of them are drawn from what political party? We still have the two political parties, you know, Republicans and Democrats, late 19th century. What party seems to be most involved in anti-imperialism? It was the Democrats. The Democrats tended to be most vocally anti-imperialist. Now, we're going to talk a little bit more about this today when we move on. But there's something kind of fundamental, and we've talked about it in other classes, I think. There's something fundamental different in traditional Federalist, National Republican, Whig, Republican Party perspective from that Jeffersonian Democratic perspective. And I'll tell you, brothers and sisters, it's still the case. If you look at the underlying philosophy between the two, it still is there. So it's not like there's been a big shift. What does what would the Republican perspective, why would the Republican Party, more than the Democrats, push for imperialism? Okay, industrialization and trade. Because Republicans have tended to view the economy and the government aiding economic development and industrialists and business people as crucial. And even when you look at their progressive movement, you had, at this time you've got progressives that are Republican and progressives that are Democrats. The progressive Republicans tend to want to change, to improve the economic system. In other words, we talked about it yesterday with capitalism, it's gotten skewed. And so the government needs to intervene to clean up the economic system so the economy functions better. Okay, Democrats have traditionally taken a very different approach because their concern isn't the economy functioning well. Their concern is
welfare of the people.
the welfare of the people, and particularly what kind of people?
Farmers and
Farmers, small business people, the guys who are on the bottom. And so it's far more focused on providing their welfare than enhancing the broader economics. And I mean, that goes back to Jefferson and his love for small farmers. You know, while Hamilton and the Federalists are bankrolling industry, Jefferson is talking about the small farmer as being the foundation of our country. That's a huge difference in philosophy. You know, that's an enormous difference in philosophy. And that philosophy at times is going to say the government should intervene a lot, but going to intervene a lot for small farmers, you know, for the wage earners, for the laborers in factories, you know, and the government intervening to promote industry, tariffs, you know, trade agreement. It's going to be a whole, they may do the same thing, but the reason they're doing it is very different. So when we talk about this looking beyond ourselves, the Democrats tend to be, or most Democratic leaders tend to be opposed to it. There's also a negative side to the Democratic opposition. What's on kind of the negative side? Why would the Democrats tend to oppose imperialism?
Take care of our own. We're isolated.
Okay, good. And that's good. A lot of the Democratic Party, when you say take care of your own, what would a lot of Democrats at the turn of the century see as their own? Where does the Democratic Party in the United States, turn of the 19th century into the 20th, where does the Democratic Party find its strength?
In labor.
Finds a lot of strength in labor, but even more strength in one part of the United States.
South.
In fact, called the or the Solid South. Because a Democrat running for president can be assured that he's going to carry the old Confederacy. He's going to carry the old Confederacy. Those are electoral votes you can count on. You can count on the state of Alabama electing 2 Democratic senators. Period. End of discussion. In fact, that's one of the games the Democrats play, you know, in the South. You know, that they could have party primaries that excluded black people, African Americans, you know, because it was a private primary. It was a Democratic Party primary. You know, therefore Democrats should participate, and if the Democrats never admit anybody of color, then it is a private election, and in southern states it was the Democratic primary that was important because the general election was a foregone conclusion, you know, because the Republicans are all going to win. You know, so the primary was important, and you could keep the primary white. You could keep the primary election white. Okay? Why would good southern Democrats oppose imperialism? What's going to be the problem with imperialism? You're going to end up
With
including non-white people within the United States, within the American empire. And you know what? If I'm a Southern Democrat, we don't need any more people of color, you know, under the American flag. Right?
The African Americans voted Republican well in the 1920s.
Absolutely. Jackie Robinson,
Yeah.
you know, to the day he died was a Republican. Martin Luther King was a Republican early on. And they said, you know, I see memes and stuff. You know, well, yeah, we forget that Martin Luther King started as a Republican. Well, that was a really different Republican Party in the South. You know, it was in the South often the liberals that were the Republicans. You know, in the South, because the Democrats, they weren't by anybody's definition progressive. You know, in that solid South. So, you know, it's things have changed. Things have changed a lot. Anyway, so you've got the Democrats that tend to be anti-imperialist, and the Republicans that tend to want to expand for the sake of markets. Okay? Now, we have some pivotal events we talked about. What's the first place we look to expand? The United States looks to expand? It's sitting right there. It's in front of it. What's
Hawaii?
Hawaii, because we want pineapples. You know, and Himalayas, right? And little, you know, a lot of folks wanted those little umbrellas. They go in drinks, you know? And so Hawaii. And Republican President Benjamin Harrison annexed it because we have a white businessman revolution in Hawaii, overthrows the Queen. Let's become American. And Benjamin Harrison says, hot dog. Only he says it, you know, doesn't say hot dog.
Yeah.
But he says, hot dog. You know, let's do it. Unfortunately, he doesn't win the election. Who's president? Grover Cleveland. And Grover Cleveland says, no, because he's a good anti-imperialist. No, we are not going to annex Hawaii. What we should be doing in Hawaii is helping the people develop their own democracy. We're going to see that a little bit later. You know, this is what we should be doing. We shouldn't be annexing these things to make them American, you know, make them American territory. And we should be conveying to them democratic principles, Republican principles, you know, so that they can develop their own democracies, you know, but not as American territory. Fundamental difference in perspective. Okay, so the United States ends up waiting until 1898 to do what? Annex Hawaii, which we eventually do. And why does the United States do it then? Because we've got a Republican president. You know who pushes it? You know, William McKinley says, hot dog, we've been waiting, you know, 4 years, let's go for it. And so Hawaii becomes
State.
American.
Yeah.
Yes, it becomes an American. Now Hawaii's born because it's in the middle of the ocean. You know, so it's a good place to be. But that doesn't stop after William McKinley is elected. That doesn't stop. They don't even stop with Hawaii. What else? And understand, he's being moved by a lot of forces. Even though William McKinley wasn't a passionate imperialist, he was tepid at best. But he had people that were really fired up about this. Like who? We talked about last week.
Teddy Roosevelt.
Teddy Roosevelt. You know, he was always going to William McKinley, whispering in his ear, what? Bullet. Bullet. In fact, yeah, bullet. You know, and you know, McKinley was really bothered. You know, he's not bothered. He was always saying, bullet. You know, and so Teddy Roosevelt is pushing. Who else is pushing? What's that? Businessmen, industrialists are pushing it. My God, you've got what would have called yellow journalists, like Hearst and Pulitzer, that want to expand the United States. And so McKinley is being pushed. And what ends up happening with McKinley? Well, while McKinley is president? Well, before SpanishAmerican War, you know. So we stand up to a major European power,
We didn't
Spain.
like them anyhow.
What's that?
We didn't like Spain anyhow.
Oh, why would you?
They're all falling apart.
Oh, it's falling apart. You know, sometimes you make that rice, it's all sticky. You know, yeah. So he, you know, McKinley had no rhythm. He couldn't do a flamingo dance. You know, so it was, you know, no
Was he
reason.
Presbyterian?
Yeah, probably.
You're the one that started it
You have,
2 years ago.
you have to leave, you get the dunce cap.
Okay, well that's, he probably was McKinley, my God. You know,
Probably.
I'm thinking. Okay, He sure wasn't Catholic, I'll tell you that.
No.
All right, so McKinley, Spanish-American War, we defeat the Spanish, woo, and acquire
Philippines.
empire. We are now activated because we get the Philippines and we get Puerto Rico and we get Guam, which is even better because it's even closer. So we are moving west into the Pacific, right? All right, McKinley, Shogash at the Pan American Exhibition in Chicago, 1901, comes to shake William McKinley's hand covered with a handkerchief. What's under the handkerchief? A gun, and he, boom, kills him. Killed. Now, if, what was it, his vice president when he was elected in 1896, I think was Alton Morton, who was, I believe, a congressman. But when he runs in 1900, his running mate is a brash young man named Teddy Roosevelt. And so when McKinley goes down, Teddy Roosevelt goes up. And Teddy Roosevelt is a rabid imperialist, right? American expansion. And what are some of the things that Teddy Roosevelt does that expands American power? Panama Canal. Even if you have to pay for a revolution, it's worth it if you can build a canal, right? If you can build a canal, okay, which Roosevelt does. What else does Roosevelt do or push?
Big Navy.
Big Navy. A big Navy. Not a big army. Army's going to stay small, but a big Navy, because the Navy's going to exert power around the Great White Fleet. So Roosevelt builds a Great White Fleet. What else does Roosevelt do? This is important too, because it's going to change the way we relate to our neighbors close to home. The Roosevelt corollary to the Monroe Doctrine, which is similar to the Bush Doctrine when President Bush was in office. The Roosevelt corollary. Monroe Doctrine said foreign powers, European powers, need to leave the Western Hemisphere alone. The Roosevelt corollary is stating that the United States has a right to intervene in Western Hemisphere countries if it appears as though they are threatened by foreign forces. And so when it appears that the Dominican Republic or Venezuela are going to default on their loans to Great Britain, and Great Britain is demanding payment, Roosevelt does what? Sends in the Marines. Because he has a right now to protect Western Hemisphere territory from European powers. This is a huge thing, because you get the United States now intervening in Western Hemisphere countries. This is a big deal. All done by a Republican who is really progressive. Because he is breaking up, trust buster, breaking up things. But this is consistent with kind of a Republican idea. You break up the trust because it inhibits competition. It's not good for the economy, but you know what is good for the economy? Having markets all around the world. What is good for the economy is the United States government digging a canal. Not a private company, but the government digging a canal through Panama. That's good for the United States economy. Okay, very consistently Republican idea, the old Federalist idea. Okay, so Roosevelt, big stick, Caribbean, doing that kind of stuff. Now, all of this is occurring. Oh, something else has happened with John Hay, Secretary of State. Again, the United States exerting power. Where is the United States deciding to exert power? In China. And the United States does something amazing, although they pull it off because Britain is behind them saying to the other guys. And what does the United States say in China?
They're carving out their own.
Yeah, if China's going to keep its territorial integrity, so nobody's going to get colonies in China. All countries can deal equally in Chinese markets. So nobody is going to be excluded, but you can carve out spheres of influence. That's fine. You just have to respect Chinese territorial integrity. This is again exerting power, good for markets because it opens up China to American markets or to American manufacturing. Okay.
Why did the other countries agree to that, not breaking up China?
Because nobody trusts anybody else. Nobody else trusts anybody else. Because if you didn't do it, then somebody, one of these guys, is gonna violate sort of a gentleman's agreement and start annexing territory and shoving others out of the market.
Because America didn't have the power to do it.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. It was only because primarily Britain, backed the United States in their open door policy. Because Britain had the largest navy, was the most aggressive trading power. But I see, and we don't really recognize when we look at history, the British competition at the turn of the century wasn't with Germany. Germany wasn't a big issue with Britain, nor was the United States. Who were the powers that Britain were most worried about?
France.
Britain was really concerned about France. Where was France a principal competitor to the British? In Africa. Britain and France are really harsh competitors in Africa.
They almost went to war in 1890.
They really did. They really did. Africa was a big deal in this rivalry between France and Britain. When you look to Asia, Britain saw as its principal competition not France, but what country would you see?
Russia.
It was going to be Russia. It was Russia. And why would Russia be considered a huge deal for Britain in Asia? If France was a competitor in Africa, it was going to be Russia in Asia.
They didn't have to cross any ocean.
They didn't have to cross any oceans. They had borders. And what areas were Britain really concerned about Russian pressure and influence?
Afghanistan.
Britain got involved in a war in Afghanistan that never ended. But only because they wanted to keep the Russians out. Afghanistan becomes the doorway to what? India. They are sweating bullets that the Russians are putting pressure in India. Because the Russians want an outlet to the Indian Ocean. And to get it, they're going to have to go through British territory, and that scares the pudding out of the British. You also have the Russians in China exerting all kinds of influence in Manchuria.
They had a problem in the Crimeans too.
Absolutely. Yes, and that's why the British prop up the Ottoman Empire for so long, so that the Russians don't get that access. This is a big deal to the British. So it's in the British interest to allow everybody to be involved, because that kind of constrains the French and it constrains the Russians, and as sort of a benefit, it's going to constrain the Germans, who are also getting more active, And oddly enough, and people don't realize, the Austrians, have a city that they control in China, a trading city. So even the Austrians are involved in this China deal. It's really, really and the Portuguese. It's really interesting what's going on in China. All right, so we've got this looking beyond ourselves. Now, what is going to change the game? This is all well and good, but what would be some things that would change the game for American imperialism?
World War I?
Well, if you have a major war, particularly where? What sort of change American interest overseas?
The Russians, Chinese.
Okay.
Japanese war.
If you have an issue between in Asia that may draw the United States in, that could be a real problem. Would cause the United States to say, "Hey, I don't know that we want to be involved in this." What else? Now we have gone with a philosophy from the beginning of the 1890s to the early part of the 20th century. Same philosophy, right? Whether it's McKinley president, whether it's Roosevelt president, whether it's Taft president, we're working with the same general philosophy, that the United States needs to assert its power overseas. So what would change American direction? Change in philosophy. change in philosophy. And what might usher in, because understand, we've got McKinley running against defeating, who does he defeat in 1896? All right.
Right.
What's that? William Jennings Bryan.
Right.
William Jennings Bryan. Anti-imperialist. William Jennings Bryan's pacifist. Really anti-imperialist. Defeats him in 1896, defeats him in 1900. William Jennings Bryan's influence on the Democratic Party in terms of foreign affairs is geared towards pacifism, internal focus. We don't want to be active in foreign affairs. If that philosophy enters the White House, we're going to have what? A change in direction. Right? We're going to have a philosophical change in the United States. Now, one of the things I told you last week we're going to look at as we look at American policy is a pendulum. And the pendulum always swings. And we know that. Pendulum swings. And it'll swing from interventionists to isolationists. And then it'll swing back. And then it'll swing back. And we see that for 100 years, going back and forth. It's been on this side, the imperialist interventionists. We can expect it to, because what are some questions that people are going to have, just regular people are going to have, about this aggressive foreign policy?
Why aren't we spending more time on doing social welfare things instead of all this time on foreign intervention?
Why are we spending so much time worrying about foreign countries? Teddy Roosevelt's going to win the Nobel Peace Prize. For doing what?
For
Staying
getting the
on.
war, the Japanese.
Well, that's right. By negotiating the Portsmouth Conference, by negotiating the end of the Russo-Japanese War. So Roosevelt is not only exerting American power, he's becoming a player internationally, a mediator internationally. That takes a lot of time and attention, right? Panama Canal looks great if I want to ship things from New York to California, but if I'm working in a factory in Chicago, Panama Canal?
It doesn't make any difference.
Really?
No.
Who cares?
Who cares? Buying the Virgin Islands from Denmark so we can protect the Panama Canal? Really? Really? Why are we spending the time, but maybe more important than time, why are we spending the money, because what drives all history? Money. Why are we spending the money building a navy to exert power over people we're not sure we even want?
And why should my boy go over there and do that and get killed?
That is exactly right. Why are you putting my son in harm's way? Why are you building this huge navy? Who is going to attack us by sea? Who's going to attack us? British going to attack us? I don't think so. We've had Canada for, living next to Canada for a long time. They ain't attacked us there. Why would they attack us to the sea? Mexico? Oh, give me a break. Mexico? Mexico is a basket case. There Diaz is the revolution, Pancho Villa, Zapata. Mexico's a basket case. Pancho Villa invades the United States, burns a town in New Mexico, But geez Louise, we're not worried about them building a navy and attacking. Who is going to attack us? Why do we need this big navy? Well, we need a big navy because we now control the Philippines. Let me think. We have a navy because we have the Philippines. So if we don't have the Philippines, we don't need to spend a lot of money on a big navy. Which makes more economic sense?
Duh.
Duh. If you don't have it, you don't have to spend on it. And so, yes.
Well, we're also fighting a rather bitter war in the Philippines.
Oh, yeah.
Against the Muslim population.
And I'm telling you, that was a horrible thing. that Filipino insurrection. We lost far more soldiers putting down the Filipino insurrection after we beat the Spanish. I mean, when we beat the Spanish, one guy got an infection from opening a beer can. You know, and that was a casualty. We didn't lose anybody fighting the Spanish in the Philippines. But you know, and this is where it shows that foreign people just don't appreciate us. They didn't want us to control them. We set them free from the Spanish, right? And yet they didn't want us to control them any more than they wanted the Spanish.
Why would they?
Lack of gratitude. You know, lack of gratitude. You know.
They didn't want
Okay. All right. So we're talking about time. We're talking about attention. We're talking about money. All right. So if we have, you know, there are people that Teddy Roosevelt with a big stick. You know, that's really expensive to wheel that thing around. All right. So we're going to have a shift of philosophy, and it's going to come with the election of Woodrow Wilson. And Woodrow Wilson is going to combine all these Democratic factors into one person, Woodrow Wilson. My father's uncle, and I don't know what that makes me, he's my great uncle, or somebody said, no, he's your uncle too, I don't know. But my father's uncle was named Woodrow Wilson Watkins. Woodrow Wilson Watkins. Uncle Wilson. And, you know, so Woodrow Wilson Watkins, Woodrow Wilson.
Weight Watchers.
Well, he was a founder of Weight Watchers.
Yeah,
that's right, he was very thin. Woodrow Wilson was born in the glorious state of Virginia. In fact, he was born in the city of Stanton. And who else was born in Stanton? Let me think. Yeah. I was. Yeah. I remember. Woodrow and I used to play together when we were growing up. You know. He taught me to throw a curve. You know. So Woodrow and I were like that growing up. Woodrow Wilson was born in Stanton, Virginia. But he spent a lot of his life living in South Carolina and living in Georgia. He earns a PhD in political science. So Woodrow Wilson is an international smart guy. He is not an idiot. Woodrow Wilson. In fact, to show that he is not an idiot, he becomes president of what Yankees think, Yankee Presbyterians think is the center of the universe. They're wrong, but they think the center of the universe is Princeton, President of Princeton. Okay, so Woodrow Wilson is a big academic. I mean, he's writing books. You know, now we talk about presidents reading books. You know, Wilson is writing them. You know, and I'm not talking about comic books. You know, I'm talking about real books. You know, and Woodrow Wilson is writing books. You know, he is an accomplished guy. You know, look, he's holding a book. And not a cell phone. You know, this is a big deal. You know, so Woodrow Wilson gets elected as governor of New Jersey, but as a Southerner. He is a Southerner. You know, he really is.
First Confederate president.
That's exactly right. The first person, certainly since the Civil War, from the South, to be elected. Woodrow Wilson carries with him that Southern perspective. Woodrow Wilson, no one would say Woodrow Wilson is progressive when it comes to race. He is not racially progressive. But he is progressive economically. You know, he really is. You know, so Woodrow Wilson is elected president of the United States in 1912. Now, 1912 is kind of an interesting election because, you know, the Democrats had been running, you know, Grover Cleveland wins, loses, wins again. You know, before Grover Cleveland, the last president was James Buchanan. You know, was the last. The Democrats are not on a winning streak when it comes to presidents. And you know, so it's a little like when they asked Will Rogers which party convention he was going to attend in 1924, whether he was going to attend the Democratic and or the Republican convention, and he said, "Well, of course I'm going to attend the Democratic convention because they have more fun knowing that they're not going to go do anything or go anywhere after the convention." You know, that's sort of the highlight of the Democratic year because the Republicans always beat them. Okay, that's kind of what's going on here. 1912, but they can count on the solid South. 1912, Wilson is running as a Democrat, but he's a Southerner. You know, which again, Democrats don't want to do because they're going to carry the South if they, regardless of who they nominate. The South is not going to vote for Republicans. I mean, good night. When I was growing up, we would yellow dog Democrats, which means you'd sooner vote for a yellow dog than a Republican. You know, so yellow dog Democrats, you know, they were going to vote. If you ran a dog for president, they would get the solid South. You know, so it doesn't do them any good to nominate a Southerner to run. You know, because they're going to the South anyway. They're going to take off Yankees. So his running mate is a guy named Thomas Marshall, who's senator from Indiana. You know, so they've got inroads in the North. So he's running for president, running on a very progressive ticket. Now, normally this is just an exercise in futility. For one, to get the nomination is hard enough because there's a guy in Missouri who wants the nomination. There's another guy that's lurking around in the background from Nebraska who the Democrats have already run 3 times in Dallas. And his name is William Jennings Bryan. Has already run 3, and he's ready for a 4th go. And so he can lose again, and every time he loses, he gets fewer votes, you know, but he's going to do it again by George. So it's not easy to get the nomination. Wilson does it by making accommodations to the Bryan supporters. One of which will be the assurance that if he is nominated and elected, William Jennings Bryan will be Secretary of State. And what is the job of Secretary of State? Foreign policy. And so you've got this rabid anti-imperialist is going to manage American foreign policy if Wilson wins, because Wilson's principal interest isn't foreign policy, it's domestic. Okay, so he gets the nomination, running for president. People assume, okay, running for president, you know, he'll do this, they'll carry Mississippi, and then we get a Republican, right? Because that's what happens every year. But the Republicans are in an interesting position in 1912. What's the Republican situation in 1912?
Split.
What's that?
Split party.
Bull moves. When Roosevelt decides that he doesn't want to run in 1908, he sort of taps his successor, who will run for president and continue his policy, which is an aggressive, progressive policy, particularly breaking up trust to increase competition within industries. And the one he sort of taps on the shoulder is William Howard Taft from the glorious state of Ohio. Okay, William Howard Taft is running for president, and William Howard Taft shakes Roosevelt hand. Oh yeah, I'll do it. Oh, you can count on me. You know, West boy, you can count on me. I'll do it. William Howard Taft is a plump guy. He's a plump guy. So he, I'll do it. Don't worry. And Roosevelt says, "Hot dog. Now I can take a vacation." Boom! Roosevelt goes to the Amazon, you know, to hunt God knows what. You know, he's going to kill some kind of animal in the Amazon, you know, but he's gone, right? And William Howard Taft wins because Republicans always win. And, you know, he's president. The trouble is, William Howard Taft isn't really a happy progressive. You know, so he does some things that Roosevelt doesn't like. And Teddy Roosevelt is not a shy and retired guy, right? He's kind of out there, expressing his opinion, and he says, William Howard Taft, you, what? Stink! That's pretty hard. You stink! You shouldn't be president. I think you're the worst excuse for a president I've ever seen. I'm going to run against you and get the Republican nomination in 1912. Now, the thing that presidents have, and I'll tell you, we can see it right now. You know what the Republican Party is doing? The official party is doing all over the country. They are changing primary rules and way states select delegates to the convention. They're changing them, even as we speak. You know, canceling primaries and stuff. Why are they doing that? Why would they do that? I mean, I'm not saying it's a bad thing. Democrats do the same thing. Democrats were doing it, you know, when Barack Obama was president, doing the exact same thing. Why are they doing it?
So they could get the one they want in there.
So they could get the one who's in office renominated. The last thing you want is to have the party in power to be fractured before the election, right? So you change the rules to make it easier for the guy in office to be renominated. This is not nasty. This is what everybody does. You know, and that's what they're doing right now, canceling primaries. So President Trump he won't face a serious challenger in any kind of primary on the Republican side. That's the way it is. He's going to face 85 Democrats that are now running. You know, good news. My father announced last week that he's running. So he's running. You know, every year. I'm sure half of y'all are running, which is okay. That's what the party does. They want to support the guy at the top because the guy at the top has been doing what while he's in office? Changing the people who are in charge of states and such. You know, so he has exerted, and that's William Howard Taft controls the party, right? They go into the convention. Roosevelt is running against him for the Republican nomination. Republicans are not happy with that. You know, Roosevelt's running against him. Taft controls the party. It would appear as though Roosevelt wins the few primaries that they have, because we don't have many, most of them by convention. So he wins the primaries, but who wins the nomination? William Howard Taft wins the nomination. Now parties hope that the guy who loses says, we are all going to be united around this guy. We are all going to be united around this. I ran a good race, but you chose him and he has my support 100%. You know, like what Ted Kennedy did with Jimmy Carter in 1980. He was a little delayed on saying that when he lost in the nomination. He could have done it faster, but he eventually did it. You know, we represent the same party. Does this sound like Teddy Roosevelt? No. He charged up, he was charging up San Juan Hill without a horse. Geez Louise, this guy is not somebody that stays in the shadows. He doesn't get the nomination, so he says, it's my basketball.
I'm going
home. I'll form a new party. And they call it, and what's the focus of the party? Teddy Roosevelt. We are going to form the Progressive Party. We're going to form a Progressive Party. Now, third parties in the United States are not unusual. We've had third parties forever. This is going to be a third party. But the platform is what? Teddy Roosevelt is the platform. But you got to have a convention, because you got to wear funny hats and have balloons and look stupid on television. So, you got to have a convention. So he has his own convention. And you'll never believe what happens when these three delegates end up voting for the nominee. Now, Roosevelt had no idea this was going to happen. The Progressive Party have their convention, and most of them are Republicans. They end up nominating. Guess who they nominate? Teddy Roosevelt. They nominated Teddy Roosevelt. It's a landslide. It's a landslide. I think his mother got one vote. But, she couldn't run because she couldn't vote at that time. So, he gets a nomination. Now, he's running as a progressive Republican, running against William Howard Taft. Another Republican. Sandy, does it sound good?
No.
Doesn't sound good.
Sounds
Now,
like-
if you're a Republican.
No, it sounds like a lot of fun.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, anything that has Roosevelt is going to be a lot of fun, right? Because Teddy Roosevelt feels like a... feels like what?
A winner.
Like a bull moose.
Oh, that's.
Man, he even gets shot at. He gets shot at. And when he gets hit, it's not shot at and the guy missed. He gets hit and he finishes his stupid speech. Teddy Roosevelt, man, Teddy Roosevelt is a man. William Howard Taft is a blimp. And they're running against each other for Republican votes. And Woodrow Wilson is saying, geez,
I got it.
what can I say? So Wilson runs and ends up winning. But he only gets 42% of the popular vote. He only gets 42% of the popular vote. So he doesn't get a majority, but as everybody in this room knows, you do not have to win the popular vote to win the election. You can come in second and win. You don't even, it's not even a participation trophy. You could actually win the big prize. And Wilson buries Roosevelt, because Roosevelt becomes his principal competitor. Just buries Roosevelt at the Electoral College. And Taft wins Utah.
Well, he
I don't know what to
won
say.
Utah.
He did win
He
Utah.
won Utah.
He was real popular in Utah. I don't know. So Wilson is now president of the United States, and he appoints who's Secretary of State?
Right.
William Jennings Bryan. So William Jennings Bryan is he is a great orator. He is a great politician. William Jennings Bryan is not a great administrator. He is not gifted in administration. He's never had to. He's always been running for something. He is not a gifted administrator. So the State Department becomes kind of what modern word would you use to describe it? Becomes well, my first thought was a mess. But then I was thinking of you could use the same term that the president used to describe some African countries. Because that's what ends up happening in the State Department. Because William Jennings Bryan is not a good administrator. He just isn't. Nice guy, fun at parties, great dancer. But not a great administrator. But that's okay with Wilson because his focus is where? What does Wilson care about? Here, because he is a what? Democrat. He doesn't really want an empire. So he's going to focus here. And Wilson does a lot of things as he's focusing here. Boy, I'm going to hit that button every time. He starts what's called his New Freedom domestic agenda, which is all about the United States and continues the idea of limiting trust, breaking up trust. But also is interested in things like, protecting labor. So there's a lot of restrictions on what, businesses can do with respect to labor. Often that's not part of the Republican progressive agenda. That focus isn't as much on labor, it's more in terms of companies competing with one another. But again, the Democratic philosophy is a little different. So it shifts to more workers. Territories, Wilson is not concerned about territories. In fact, believes that territories should be free. So looking forward to free places like the Philippines as quickly as he possibly can.
You know why we kept Puerto Rico as a colony instead of just making an independent country like Cuba?
Why is that?
I don't know.
I thought you were asking,
Yeah.
Because they don't.
well, that gives me the opportunity to make something up now. I don't know. I really don't know why they choose Puerto Rico.
He said rum.
Rum! There you go. There you go. And we wouldn't have West Side Story. If it wasn't for that. Yeah, I don't know. Could be connected with the same reason we bought the Virgin Islands. That we wanted possessions in the Caribbean. Cuba was too big for us to manage, but wanted some possessions to guard the canal that hadn't been built yet, but is anticipated. So, but I don't know. I don't know. I can guarantee you. The opposition to annexing places like Puerto Rico is coming principally from what part of the country? Coming from the South. Why would it be coming from the South? Well, not only racial, but
They're the position down.
well, position,
Competitors in a lot of
And
crops.
and sugar.
Sugar. Wow.
You're going to have, if you're competing in sugar, remember the South is still raw materials, and that's what's coming from the South. South isn't industrialized, and when we take possession of the Philippines so that we're close to China, Hawaii, Guam, and the Philippines, so that we've got all these fueling stations on the way to China. We're not looking to sell the Chinese corn or wheat or sugar. We're looking to sell the Chinese
Iron.
on manufactured goods. We're looking to sell manufactured goods. That's what we're selling the Chinese. The South, that profits the South not at all, because they're still growing raw materials. I mean, they're agricultural. We're not selling agricultural products. Now, that's not why we're getting these possessions. As a matter of fact, as we are selling industrial products over, sending those to China, what happens to the price of those products in the United States? They go up. They go up. Because stuff that could be sold here, your supply becomes diminished because it's being sold elsewhere. So for Southerners who have to buy manufactured goods here, those goods in the United States are going up in price. And their raw materials are not, or at least staying the same, because we're not shipping them anywhere. So demand isn't changing in terms of raw agricultural materials, but it is changing in terms of industrial. So that's another reason why the South was not keen on this territorial expansion. So Wilson's perspective on territories is we need to prepare them. What Wilson, and then I'm going to give you a break, what Wilson said about even both the territories and potential territories, that his goal was to help people in these countries elect good other men, to elect good men that believed in democracy. That was going to be his goal. Not to become American, but to claim American values. And you don't do that by colonizing. You don't do that by controlling them. You do that by educating them. And that's what now whether he's right or not, or whether the two go together, or whether this is more expensive, I don't know. But that was his philosophy, and his philosophy with the territories. Okay.
Nope.
Yep, did it again. Okay, go. We'll talk about the first term foreign policy when you get back.
You asked a question last week that I haven't been able to get out of my head. In fact, I was.
Takes a while to get
Is
up.
there
I
a
know.
global morality?
Is that what?
Is there a global morality?
Ooh, I asked that question? Did I really?
Yes, you did.
Man, that was an astute question.
It was.
I didn't think I was that sharp.
Fuzzy water you were drinking.
Yeah, that's right. There's a lot of things I don't remember about. I was seeing a lot of colors, yeah.
It was part of I don't even remember the before and
Well,
after.
I think that's a good question. Is there a global morality?
Always use my teeth.
Yep.
I enjoyed that yesterday, the capitalism.
Oh,
versus
thank
socialism.
you.
I enjoyed it. I have trouble separating though the politics from
Absolutely.
From
Absolutely.
But I mean, the way you presented that, it made socialism look. The good points are good.
Well, the key is and I was talking to a young man. It was funny.
Yeah, I was sorry I missed you.
I'm going to cut this. What Wilson is going to promote is something that he calls moral diplomacy, which, when you think about it, really may be a precursor of another Democratic president at least claimed to follow, in our lifetime. You remember what Democratic president kind of suggested the same sort of approach to foreign policy? Yeah, President
And
Carter.
he is moral.
Yeah,
For
President.
real.
Yeah, President Carter.
He's a moral.
You know, we're going to follow a moral foreign policy that is going to emphasize morality, not expediency, or it's not the enemy of my friend. My enemy is my friend. You're going to follow a different set of rules. Whether that works or not in the real world, I don't know. But it's certainly similar. Now, part of his moral policy, again, was the appointment of William Jennings Bryan as Secretary of State. And if William Jennings Bryan had been a good administrator, then you might have seen a lot of things occur during his tenure in office, but he wasn't, so we really didn't. But that was going to be part of it, and of course, at the root is going to be an anti-imperialist. So I'm going to deal with foreign countries not as the controller, but rather as sort of the teacher. I'm going to lift up the country's ranks. All right. This is going to have some interesting impacts in Latin America. Now, remember we talked about Teddy Roosevelt. His view on Latin American countries was what? If we look at the Roosevelt corollary, what was Roosevelt's view on American power in Latin America and the Caribbean?
We wanted our way. We
Yeah,
weren't going to let anybody else get involved from anywhere else.
Yes, it's going to be our way, or Marines are going to be in your capital.
Right.
Okay, Wilson is following a moral, what he calls moral diplomacy. What he sees himself doing is educating the people in countries to elect, good men. I'm still saying men because that's the way it was. Good men that have democratic principles behind them. And so, what Wilson will do when there's a problem in Haiti, Wilson will do what? How do you think Wilson will respond to that? When there's this governmental crisis in Haiti, what is Wilson going to do? He's going to send in the Marines. He's going to send in the Marines. Now, he's going to do the exact same thing that Roosevelt did. He's going to say he's doing it for different reasons. Roosevelt's doing it to assert American authority. Wilson's doing it to prevent civil war, but the action is going to be the same. It's going to be the same. But there's a closer problem for Wilson in office. What's the problem that is closer than Haiti or the Dominican Republic?
Mexico.
Mexico's a basket case.
It still is.
Well, no. Mexico has been controlled by a man named Diaz, who is a dictator, in Mexico. And there is a huge revolution. We're not talking about, crime and corruption. We're talking about huge revolution, revolutionary forces fighting a civil war in Mexico. So it's a mess in Mexico. And we've got war, Zapata in the south, and you've got Pancho Villa in the north, and they see themselves as revolutionaries, but in reality, they come really close to gangsters or gang leaders or mafia or little chieftains or they have their own little private army.
Looks like Afghanistan.
Yeah, like Afghanistan. The little army that has no qualms about raiding a Mexican village for supplies, or an American village for supplies. So Mexico is in a state of complete political turmoil. There is a government, but you've got these renegade armies that are moving all around. Now, what does that do to the southern border? You think the southern border is bad? People think the southern border is bad now. It ain't like this. What's going on at the southern border? When Wilson recognizes the new government in Mexico as a legitimate government, and it ain't Pancho Villa, what does Pancho Villa do? He leads his little army across the American border. You know, he starts raiding American towns, you know, along the border. Now, does he represent Mexico? No. Who does he represent? Pancho Villa. You know, Pancho Villa. You know, this is an independent army that he is. And how does that independent army get paid? By raiding villages. You know, that's how they get paid. And so you've got a problem on the Mexican border like we hadn't seen before. You know. So Wilson does what?
Sends in the troops.
Sends in the troops.
Sends in the Marines.
Yeah, well, this time he sends in the army because they're under Black Jack Pershing. You know, sends them to the border. And the army, and not only sends them to the border, sends them
Into Mexico.
into Mexico. You know, sends them into Mexico. So, you know, the United States invades Mexico to stop this renegade army that doesn't represent the Mexican government. Moral diplomacy. Okay, but what, by having this going on, where is his focus? Where is Wilson focusing?
On the United
On the
States.
United States. You know, we're talking about 1912. Now, what's going on in 1912 outside of the United States?
And Europe is
You've got a minor thing occurring in Europe.
they killed
Right?
They killed the crown prince or whatever. Their girlfriend.
1912 in Europe. Everybody is chilling in Europe, right?
Not really. They're ready for war.
Yeah, they're getting ready for war. Because when everybody's building big armies, right? And the Kaiser's an idiot, you know, who's leading arguably the most powerful country, military powerful country in the world. But he is incompetent on a lot of levels. You know, certainly in his relationship. Somehow the Kaiser did the impossible. That Bismarck kept Germany from being in this position for decades. Somehow the Kaiser, because he is an idiot, somehow he ticked off
British.
the British
And the Russians.
and the French and the Russians. Ooh, the trifecta. Somehow he ticked off, and the British don't like the French,
The French don't like the
and
British.
the French don't like the British, and none of them like
Russia.
the Russians. The British don't like the Russians because the Russians are the competitor nation. The French Republic doesn't like
Anybody.
I don't like anybody.
but sure doesn't like Tsarist Russia. You know,
Yeah.
no, we got three countries that don't like each other and haven't liked each other for
Years.
between the French and the British.
Decades.
Centuries they don't like each other.
Yeah.
But somehow the Kaiser, out of astute diplomacy, brings these three countries that don't like each other, brings them together. Which means Germany is surrounded, is in a vice. You know, is in a vice. The one thing Germany does not want is to fight on a two-front war. That's stupid, you know, and somehow the Kaiser does that. You know, sometimes somehow he gets it done. Even things that he thinks are good just end up being stupid. You know, it just So he ends up 1912 Europe, but at least he's got the Austrians and the Hungarians
Not a whole
Yeah,
lot.
right.
to watch his back,
Yeah.
and the Italians. And the Italians, they're gone. As soon as it starts, they're gone. Out of the war. So we got a great war break. The Archduke, boom, gets shot. Where does he get shot? Sarajevo. Weird. You know, he avoids a bomb. You know, a guy throws a grenade. The guy throws a grenade. He doesn't die in it. His driver goes down an alley, gets caught. He gets shot. He dies. Austria has been spoiling for a fight because they want to teach Serbia a lesson. So they give demands to Serbia that they know Serbia is going to reject, and they start mobilizing their army. You know, Serbia accepts their demands. Well, that screws things up, right?
Yeah.
But you got your army already mobilizing, so, you know, the Austrians make new demands, of course, like, you know, Serbians have to change their names, or, you know, something really weird, and the Serbians say, we can't do that, so Austria declares war on Serbia. As soon as that happens, Russia declares war on Austria. Because Russia declares a war on Austria, Germany declares war on Russia. Because Germany declares war on Russia, France declares war on Germany. Germany is now caught in a vice between the two major powers. Germany feels the only way they get, but the British are sort of staying over to the side. And the Germans believe, because they've got the Schlieffen Plan, which is really, really kind of cool, that it's this wide sweep. It's sort of what they did to the French in 1871. It's this big sweep. When they sent the German army, big sweep, and just encompass Paris. This huge flanking movement, and just roll up the French armies. Just roll them up. You know, which is what they did at Sedan in the Franco-Prussian War. Same strategy, only on a bigger scale. It was smaller then, but this is going to be huge. Well, you know, the plan required a lot of soldiers. It also, if you look at the border between Germany and France, you know, if you look on a map, it's only that big. You got to get soldiers through that big. I can't get through. A mouse could. You know, you don't have a big border between Germany and France, right? So to do this big sweep, what are you going to need to do? You're going to need to go through Belgium. You know, to get and Belgium nice and flat, you know, horses can gallop, you know, that's best galloping. You know, soldiers can march, you know, you just sweep it, and that'll be great. So the Germans feel that's their only chance, you know, to win this, where they can knock the French out and then deal with the Russians, because Russians are really slow. And while the Russians are still trying to get their act together, we can defeat the French and then send the army over and deal with the Russians. But the Austrians can keep them at bay until we're ready. The Russians mobilize faster. Germany's got to divert troops from the west to the east. They don't have the manpower to have this big sweep. They invade Belgium. As soon as they invade Belgium, what does Britain do? Declares war on Germany. We now have a world war on our hands. Italy is eating pasta. They're not declaring war on anybody until they got a sense of who's going to win, and that's when they enter. You know, so but the Germans and they do their plan, and it comes fairly. You know, it's okay. But they didn't figure on new military equipment, because now we're using what?
Machine guns.
Well, not tanks yet, but you're using machine guns. You got machine guns. And the trouble is, when you're marching like Napoleonic armies, and you know, we talked about that before. What was the French uniform entering World War I? And, you know, what the French uniform looked like entering World War I?
Red and blue.
They were wearing red pants. Red pants. And a blue coat and a little cloth hat. That's what they were wearing. And so you have these, gee, is it hard to hit a guy wearing red pants? What are the Germans wearing? They're kind of wearing an olive gray. What are the British wearing? They're wearing khaki. Right? What are the French wearing? Red pants! You know, the Germans are seeing these red pants coming at them. You know,
Oh my.
aim about a foot and a half above the red pants, and you're going to hit them.
Yeah.
You know, and so eventually the French changed their uniforms. You know, because of although the blood did well on the red pants.
Yes,
You know, they changed their uniform. But you know what they changed their uniforms to?
No blue.
No, not more, but sort of a light blue.
Light blue.
Yeah, sort of like a sky blue. It was a periwinkle, kind of a periwinkle blue, which the Austrians were also wearing, by the way, until the
It was
Germans ended up
still,
supplying
he
all
still
the-
had a nice dark.
But you know, so you're coming at them with red pants. This is bad. And machine guns, you know, they're just shooting everybody. You know, and so the plan stalls, and what ends up happening in the Great War, this is 1914, a lot of movement in 1914. Russians invade Germany, and Austria. The Austrians pretty much get beaten badly, but the Germans end up counterattacking the Russians, and you know, what ends up happening, particularly in the West?
Stalemate.
Still. By the time we get to 1915, we've got a stalemate. And why do we have a stalemate?
Everybody's digging in.
Because everybody's digging in, and we have weapons that have outpaced tactics. We have weapons that have outpaced tactics. You know, the tactics in the past were, you know, charging, marching in straight lines. Great when you're dealing with muskets, you know, because of your musket you can't hit anything anyway. You know, but with machine guns marching in a straight line,
Yeah, you're.
when you're wearing red pants, you know, it's pretty dumb, you know. And so you dig in, you know, the battle, the siege of Petersburg, in fact, in the American Civil War, kind of becomes a precursor of World War I, where both sides dig trenches and just stare at one another and shoot artillery at one another and do mass charges at lines and lose huge numbers of people, you know, to take almost no territory. Now, as this is going on in Europe, so Europe is awful. Now, how is Europe during this, as this takes off? You know, and by 1915 we are at a stalemate. 1915, 1916, it is nothing going on. What are the European powers? How are they going to regard the United States? And how is the United States going to regard the European powers? What are the European? You got two sides, right? You got allies, the French, the Russians, and the British, and you got central powers. You got Germany, you got Austria, and some other guys that are running. Bulgarians are doing their thing. But you got the two sides. What are the two sides going to want to do to the other?
They want to bring the United States in on their side.
You want to bring the United States in on their side, right? You also don't want the United States to do what? Be on the other side. And you don't want them trading with the other side, right? Because the United States got a lot of food and food stuff and that kind of jazz. So both sides are going to do what? Slap on a blockade, right? So the United States is neutral, right? Neutral. We're not on either side. You know, we're not on either side. We're going to stay right in the middle. But the United States wants to trade with both sides, right? Because you make a lot of money during wars. Trade on both sides. Does Britain want us to trade with Germany?
No.
Heck no. Does Germany want us to trade with Britain?
No.
Heck no. What do both sides do? Boom! Slap on. You know? You cut off trade, right? Which country has the biggest navy in the world? The British. You know, so they're blockading. The British have the biggest navy. Do we have an active trading relationship with Germany? No. Do we? Now we have a huge trading relationship with Austria-Hungary. Not. You know, we don't trade with those powers, right? So the British they don't have to do much, you know, to stop American shipping from going to Germany. On the other hand, do we trade with Britain? Oh boy, do we trade with Britain. And Britain is an island, crying out loud. Did you know that? Britain was an island? But it is an island. And if you could cut the island off, what's going to happen?
They'll have to surrender.
Yeah, they're going to have to. They're going to get hungry. You know, so Germany slaps. They don't have. Germany has the second biggest navy in the world, but because the Kaiser is an, what was the word I used? Idiot. He builds this huge navy, but doesn't want to use it, because if you use it, you might lose it. You know, and you got this big thing. It looks really good. If you use it, they may sink it. So he keeps his great big navy pretty much at port, but he does have another weapon. He uses submarine U-boats, and he's going to use U-boats to cut off trade to Great Britain. Now, since the United States trades a lot, we're neutral, right? Yeah. We are not taking sides. Now, why can the United States? We don't speak English, right? We speak. Yeah. My grandmother didn't think you Yankees did it very well, but you know, we'll agree that we speak English. There's a sizable portion of a sizable number of Germans in the United States. You know, people with names like, what? What's that?
Miller.
Miller and
Bishop.
What's that?
Bishop.
Bishop and Rudiger. So we got a sizable number of Germans who may be tilting towards the Germans. So it's kind of an open question. All right, so we're going to blockade, and we're shipping a lot with Britain. So the Germans need to cut off the trade, so they start doing what? They start sinking ships. And the United States says, we're neutral, we're not involved, but they're still sinking ships because the ships are carrying in, at best, grain and stuff that the British need. At worst, maybe less. All right, but the United States is going to stay neutral, but it seems apparent that we're going to end up, if we're going to be involved, it's not going to be intervening on the side of Germany. We're not going to be intervening against the British. Although initially there was a sizable number of people right at the beginning, because the British blockade was felt immediately because they have such a big navy. There were people in the United States that were not happy that the British were blockading and preventing the United States from trading, shipping. And so there was some real tension between the United States and Britain. That would have been a big problem, since we got Canada right here and a major naval power. Okay, but the United States is neutral. What's going to eventually bring... Now, understand, what kind of foreign policy have we been following under Wilson? If under Roosevelt and McKinley it was interventionist, imperialist, what's been the policy under Wilson? More isolation, or less interventionist, or more, less imperialistic. Okay, now we got a war going on in Europe. The United States, we're protected by two oceans. We're not going to worry about it. I knew I was going to hit that button. I did it on purpose. The United States enters the war. Why does the United States enter the war?
The Germans sent
Because they
ships
sank
in the Lusitania.
Yes. Well, Lusitania. Sinks the Lusitania. Goes down. We send them a nasty letter. The Germans say, "I'm sorry, we won't do it anymore," and they don't. So this was a big deal. They say they sink the Lusitania, which is coming into Britain. And the Germans apologize. The United States says, "Okay, we'll accept your apology this time." Election comes in 1916. Lusitania sinks in 1950. Election 1916. Wilson runs again against a guy named Charles Evan Hughes. Charles Evan Hughes is a good Republican. He says, what about foreign policy? We got a war going on in Europe. What does Hughes say? Maybe we should be involved. Who is a Republican yelling that from any platform he can find? Teddy Roosevelt is saying, Wilson's a wimp. That becomes sort of his slogan. Wilson is a wimp. Look at him, wearing those glasses, reading books. What a loser.
Right.
Hadn't shot any big foreign animal. What a loser. He's a wimp. He needs to be involved, right? Get involved in the war. So Roosevelt's doing it. Charles Evan Hughes is doing it. Wilson is running. What's his slogan in 1916? He kept us out of war. He kept us out of war. And Wilson, although Wilson thinks he's going to lose, which is fascinating, he assumes he's going to lose this election because Republicans always win. He's still bucking the trend. The country is more Republican than it is Democrat. He thinks he's going to lose, he pulls it out. Doesn't win a majority of the popular vote. Barely wins a majority in the Electoral College, but was elected twice without getting a majority of the vote.
Did Hughes have more popular votes?
No, Hughes had less. But we still have a progressive party that runs. Roosevelt doesn't run, but La Fala runs.
Okay.
And he from Wisconsin, so he draws, he's drawing votes. We also have a much stronger socialist party, with Debs running, for president. And the Socialist Party will draw votes. So we've got a much more diverse election. No electoral votes, but it's going to be drawing votes. All right, so anyway, he ends up winning, kept us out of war. We've forgotten the Lusitania. We've got Blackjack Pershing on the Mexican border. Germany, 1917, big year. What happens in Europe in 1917? Russian Revolution. Germany does something that is Russia is a mess. They are losing people right and left. Russians are dying all over the place. On the Eastern Front, the Germans are just killing them for sport. Because it's awful. The casualties are terrible on the Eastern Front. The Tsar makes a huge the Tsarina, the Tsar's wife, and this is a problem. Remember these are royal houses, and you have to marry. A king has to marry, a princess from another country. I've read those storybooks. I know. Who is it that left her slipper when she was running out of the palace as the clock was ringing?
Cinderella.
Yeah, well, in Russia, the Tsarina is German. Ooh is right. They have hemophiliacs in the family because, that's what happens when you marry like that. Everybody's related. You end up with some real big problems. There seems to be a guy who is able to calm down, Rasputin can calm down the boy when he's having some real attacks. Rasputin is
Crazy.
a pig. Rasputin is a pig. He's a horrible guy. But he gives him a room in the castle, palace. She's German. Nicholas is not the sharpest knife in the drawer. The Russians are losing people right hands over fist. The Russian people aren't getting enough food. Pay is bad. Nicholas makes an enormous mistake. He says, I'm going to solve things. I'll go and lead the army. So he takes personal charge of the army. Why is that such a stupid move? Now you got nobody to blame. When your army is losing, you can always say, it's that general. We're going to fire him and get somebody else. He takes charge. Now when they lose,
It's his fault.
it's on him. And he's away from the capital, out with the troops where the problem is. We have revolution. Overthrow, set up a government, provisional government, under Krasinski, who is a nice guy, fun at parties. The Russian people want what? What do they want?
Peace.
They want peace. They're tired of this. Why are we fighting this war? We need peace. The Germans say, instability in Russia. We can get the Russians out of the war. We can transfer a lot of troops west and make one big push. Now, we need to increase instability in Russia. How can we do
They
this?
shipped Lenin from Switzerland.
Lenin is sitting in Switzerland. And the Germans say, we got a ticket. We got a train ticket.
Give them some money.
Yeah. You want to go back home with a little bit of German money, with a few marks in your pocket? And that's what they do. They send Lenin back to Russia, as Russia's a mess, and Lenin makes it all calm. It gets worse! And you've got rival governments in the capital, because Lenin sets up his own government, his little Soviet government. And they're making rules, and the government's making rules. Eventually something's going to happen, right? Yeah. Who wins? Lenin wins. And the first thing Lenin says is, we're leaving this war. And the Germans are going, yay, 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 that's a good thing, leave the war. Now, if the Germans had let them leave the war and been generous, then there would have been no problem. If the Germans had let them leave the war without a lot of reparations and territorial change, Russians they just didn't want to die anymore. But the Germans, no, we're good folks. And remember, we're dealing with Kaiser Wilhelm, who is a idiot. And so they make all this horribly harsh conditions on the Russians, involving a lot of land being transferred. But when you get a lot of land, and they're going to be set up as in Russian, German satellite states and kingdoms and all that, the problem is you got to occupy the troops. So you got German troops still in Russia occupying all this land that the Germans got from the Russians. Which means, what can't you do with those troops that are sitting in Kiev?
You know, you can't send them.
You can't send them west.
You can't send
It-
them over there to die.
Yeah, if they had just said pre-war borders, or even if they set up an independent Poland or something, you know, then they could have shipped their troops west. But they didn't. They had all these land demands that you had to occupy. And so the Germans weren't able to transfer the number of troops they wanted. So they're transferring them west. United States enters the war. Now the problem is, you know how many people are in the United States Army when they enter the war? 114,000. 114,000. That's the total United States Army. And where are most of these troops?
Philippines.
So a lot are in the Philippines.
Mexico.
A lot of them on the Mexican borders. A lot of them are still occupying forts in the West. You know? But that's it. 114,000 troops.
I think that sounds like the New York Police Department.
Yes, that's exactly right. So we enter the war with no troops. We're using, even though we've got the most advanced gun makers in the world, we're using antiquated equipment. In fact, when the United States enters the war, they have to they end up buying their weapons from France. Because we don't have.
Yeah, we just make airplanes or.
No, we were buying them from the French. And you know, the French were selling us their best stuff. It was awful. We didn't have anything. So we entered the war. Now, because Wilson believes in this moral diplomacy, if we're fighting this war, we have got to be fighting this war for a reason, right? And does he want to be involved in this war?
No.
No, of course not. Well, one of the little why we end up doing it, the Germany sees it has a chance now. If they can send the troops west, smack, because the French are this close to mutiny, this close to mutiny. You know, if they can really demoralize the French just a tiny bit, you know, the French army mutiny, the war's over. It's done. So, you know, so if you do one big push, this may be the end. Now, to do that, they've got to be all in. You know, it's like when you're gambling. You know, you can't be just putting, you know, one chip on black. You know, if you're really going to take a chance, what do you got to do? You got to be all in. You got to be all in. And what the Germans do is they push all the chips right into the middle of the table. Now, to do that means what they suspended in 1950, unrestricted submarine warfare, they're going to reinstitute. Because part of their big push is to cut Britain off. We are going to cut Britain off. And even if the United States enters, we're going to be able to sink those troop ships that are going across the sea, or we'll sink enough of them that we can do this push. And once the war's over, it doesn't matter whether the United States has declared war or not, right? Okay, so unrestricted submarine warfare. Now, does that make the United States happy? Heck no. They're now sinking American shipping. They're running ads in the newspaper saying, you get on an American ship going to Britain, we're going to sink you. You know, the German imperial government. The German imperial government also, because Wilhelm is an idiot, decides that maybe they can occupy the American army, all 114,000 of them, here, and they will never send them overseas. And so there's the ambassador to Mexico gets a telegram. And in the telegram that we intercept, the United States intercept, British intercept, pass it on to the United States. And the German imperial government promises Mexico, if Mexico will declare war against the United States, and understand Mexico is a basket case. If they declare war on the United States, Germany will support them, not with troops, but with, you know, money and supplies, which they won't be able to get here because the British have a blockade. But Germany will support them, and Mexico will be able to get Texas and California back. So if Mexico declares war on the United States, the Germans will guarantee that the Mexicans will reacquire Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, and California. Good deal for Mexico?
Sounds good.
Sounds good. Are the Mexicans going to defeat the United States in a war? What would you give them? What chance would you give Mexico of defeating the United States in a war? We can't say 0. Let's do 0.00000001. Yeah, that's, you know, because something could happen. But it's not going to happen. And the Mexicans look at this and say, this is the goofiest thing I've ever seen. There is no way we're going to antagonize the United States. You know, the United States, we're just finding some kind of peace with it because they're not chasing Pancho Villa anymore. You know, we don't want to antagonize them. The Germans look like idiots. You know, the people who want war publicizing this everywhere. That the United States declares war. But it's got to be a moral war, right? Right? It's got to be a moral war. What are the Europeans fighting about? What do Europeans fight about? What do people fight wars about? Land, money. You know, if Wilson says we got to join the fight so that France gets back Alsace-Lorraine, are the American people going to say, yeah, send our boys over, Alsace-Lorraine? I like those quiches. You know, go. You know, are they going to do that? No, of course they aren't. You know, they're not going to. You got to give it a moral reason, right? And so what is the moral reason that Wilson, you know, because it's still moral diplomacy, he doesn't want to intervene. Not just for the sake of power, it's got to have moral content. Why are we going to intervene? We are going to make the world safe for democracy. This is a war about democracy. This isn't a war about territory. It's not a war about money. It's not a war about an archduke that gets shot.
And it's a war to finish off.
And this will be it. You know, end of war. War to end war. This is it. And so Wilson, in an address to Congress, introduces 14 points. Now, people say that they rejected 14. They really didn't. A lot of 14 points were incorporated into the Treaty of Versailles. Part of it was treaty. Because the 14 points dealt with, you know, what do you do with the world, with Europe, after the war? And it promoted ideas like self-determination. What is self-determination?
Get your own president.
What's that?
Get your own president.
Yeah, you get your own president. You know, if you got Austria-Hungary, you got all these nations in there. You know, you got Bohemians, let them all have their own countries, right? Let them determine their future. Sounds good?
Oh, it always sounds good.
You know, so we're going to give people the right to chart their own future. In Africa, we got all these colonies. Does Wilson like colonies? Heck no. What should the European imperial powers do in Africa?
Get out of there.
They should be, but before they get out, because Wilson doesn't believe we just leave them on their own. Before they get out, what do?
Democrats.
Well, they work on democracy. You help them, teach them how to govern. You just don't rip them off and then leave. You show them how to run their countries. So but the plan is, you're going to leave Africa, you're going to leave Asia, you know, and to make sure all this works, because we got to have communication, right? We are going to form a League of Nations. We're going to form a League of Nations. And this League of Nations, when you get to the League, if you got a complaint, all these countries are represented, you got a complaint, what can you do?
Talk about it.
Go to the League and talk about it, right? You know, like a marriage counselor. You know, yeah. Oh, I didn't say that for any particular reason, Sandy. You go and the League talks about it. You know, we got a dispute with this. The League talks about it. Other countries give their advice. You know, there has no military force, just kind of an advisory thing. You know, and you work your problems out instead of shooting at one another. Okay, so we have a good moral reason for doing it. War, American troops, now we mobilize, right? We can't send 100, that'd be embarrassing to end us 140,000. So we mobilize, right? And we end up mobilizing an army of 5 million. You know, so it's a lot of, and we're doing it fast. And we should know it's in this war. What kind of war is World War I? Is it a glorious war?
Terrible.
It's a horrible. And the Western Front is horrible. Horrible. It's a bloodbath. So these American boys are sent to the trenches. There are no noble charges. There's no storming San Juan Hill. There's nothing like that. It is down and dirty and gritty and nasty with poison gas and all. And the United States spends in 2019 dollars ends up spending $330 billion on this war. You know, ends up having. Now remember, I told you the size of the army in 1914 was 114,000. We end up losing, killed 130,000 in the war. We lose more. There are more deaths, American deaths, in World War I than the army, the size of the army that existed in 1940.
There's a really good book by a fellow named Jeffrey Wayne that just came out last year about the American Army in the First World War. That covers this in really good detail.
It's a bloodbath. That most American troops are under foreign generalship, because they're the ones that are conducting the war. They're so often supporting, but often they're doing really dirty stuff.
One of the problems was the American leadership in the Army didn't understand the tactics that were going on there, and a lot of Americans died because they simply didn't understand how to fight in Europe.
And how could they?
Right.
The Europeans had been fighting it since 1914. When the Europeans started the war, they didn't know how to fight it.
Yeah.
And that's why you had these huge losses in charges, particularly in 1915, 1916. It is horrible. Okay? But if it was horrible for the United States, it was worse for Germany and Britain and France. It was awful. Okay, so the war ends. Peace conference. Now this is the opportunity to instill or apply these 14 points, this moral reason for the war. And when Wilson comes to Europe, comes to Paris, there are big signs on buildings. Viva Wilson, right? He's the hero, right? And he really is, because if it hadn't been for the United States
And the tanks.
and the British tanks, Germany may have won. That last push, Germany might have won. The French may have broken, and it was the French that were, iffy. So he's a big hero, but when he comes in and says, "Okay, guys, let's make a better world. Come on, let's make a better world." Yes! We've got Lord George and Orlando and Clemenceau, and they say, "Well, we'll get to that. We'll put it on the agenda." First major mistake at Versailles, the treaty. Who is not invited? Germany's not invited to the treaty that will end the war with who? Germany. So the Germans are not invited. Now, understand, Germany's a mess. It's just a mess in 1919. But they aren't invited here. You don't see a German ambassador hanging around. They aren't invited. And you've got the French who are interested in, well, where was the war on the Western Front fought? It was fought in France. The whole war was fought in France. What's the condition? Have you ever seen pictures? I saw a great, They Will Not Grow Old document, wonderful document on World War from the British military college. Wonderful. What does the land look like between the trenches?
Like an acre.
Yeah, there was a reason they called it no man's land.
Yeah.
It was horrible. France, Eastern France is horrible. It's just torn up. France, the war was fought in France. How do you think Clemenceau, now he looks like a walrus, don't hold it against him. How does he feel about the war? The war's over. What does he want? He wants peace, and that's all. Oh, just get the Germans out and we're happy. Heck no. What does Clemenceau want? Yeah. First he wants the land that the Germans took. in
He wants
1871.
Alsace-Lorraine.
Yeah, that's exactly right. He wants that back because they've been dealing with that for now, what, 40 years, almost 50 years. So that's what he wants. He also wants to make sure Germany
It's never a power.
is never going to be a power again. And so there's a lot of he wants to put Germany in its place, right? The Italians are there. They entered the war late, you know. When it appeared as though the Central Powers weren't going to win, the Italians jump in. The Italians want what? Land, because they want to be one of the big boys, you know. The British want trade, but they don't want to give up their position in trade. And so as Wilson is trying to negotiate, we can put aside the desire for gain, for moral principles. And the other powers are saying, I don't think so. So the treaty that is negotiated, although it has his ideas in it, it really only captures the one idea of League of Nations. And he signs it, but he can't ratify it. Who ratifies treaties?
Congress.
That's right, the United States Senate. So there's a huge ratification debate. And our people now, after this war is over, we have lost more soldiers in the war than we had soldiers before the war. We have spent $350, or what's equivalent to $330 billion on this war, which is actually a fraction of what we
didn't
spent
want-
in the last
that we
19
didn't want to
years
fight in.
here. But we have spent a lot of money. We have lost a lot of people in this war, and what? For the sake of France getting Alsace-Lorraine back? It really? The British now get, a mandate over Tanzania, Germany, East Africa? Really? That's what we fought the war for? Ratification debate, you've got, again, the pendulum. Now, in a nationalist, the pendulum is going to be kicked the other way. And when they see League of Nations, they say there is no way in this or any other world that we want to submit anything to those guys who just fought the bloodiest war in history. We are not going to be in a place where they're going to shape the decisions we make. No way. We were better off alone. We were better off alone. And so although they end up ratifying a kind of a treaty, it doesn't involve the League. We're not going to officially make peace with Germany until much later into the 1920s. They reject Wilson's, the treaty he brings home. Wilson, though, when he gets home, doesn't want to give out. He does this barnstorming tour of the United States, all these speaking engagements, speaking from trains, all over the place. And in October of 1919, Wilson has a stroke. And Wilson is now bedridden, is done. Edith, his wife, who he's only been married to for a short time, because he married her while he was in the White House, she now regulates his schedule because Wilson's had a stroke, and it's a serious stroke. And so he's not campaigning for it. Congress rejects the treaty. And now we've got to demobilize the army, which means what? We're dumping millions of men into the economy. They need jobs. So we're demobilizing the army. What's going on in this? What's happened in Russia? Russia doesn't exist anymore. What are they? They are the Soviet Union. And Soviet Union are run by communists, and communists believe in world revolution, which separates them from fascists who are nationalists. Communists are not nationalists, they're internationalists. And they want worldwide revolution, which, since it's worldwide, would include the United States. They don't want to make the United States Russian, but they do want to make the United States communist, as they want all nations to follow this philosophy. And so we have the first Red Scares, after the war. Communists are around. We've got to watch them, particularly immigrants. We've got to watch these immigrants. Okay, again, foreign policy. swings to imperialism, swings back to more isolationism, is forced back to imperialism. We're going to see it swing again, only this time it's going to be pushed by the Republicans, who don't want to give up our territories, but do want to isolate from other nations. And that's what we'll talk about next Tuesday. So, go home.
Yeah.